We actually had a false start to begin with, where we had sort of a year wandering in the desert, working on a couple of ideas in that vein. And the main one was we picked an industry that we thought was kind of boring and sleepy, which was mechanical engineering. But spent a bit of time doing that. It had really bad founder market fit. Like, we are not mechies. There was a big blind man and the elephant problem. And so eventually, decided to put that aside and decided to build for what we were really passionate about, which was programming.
Welcome to First Block, a Notion series where founders from the world's leading companies tell us what it was like to navigate the many firsts of their startup journey and what they learned from that experience. Our guest today is Michael Truell, co-founder and CEO of Anysphere. Thanks everyone for being here, and welcome to First Block. This is Notion's series where we dig into the raw, unfiltered stories behind breakout startups today. And today we're joined by Michael Truell, co-founder and CEO of Anysphere, the team behind Cursor, an AI-powered code editor that is quickly making waves with developers. In under a year, Cursor has gone from a side project to one of the fastest growing AI tools in the dev world. Michael, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Yes, excited to be here.
Let's rewind to the beginning, because this story didn't start where it ended up. So let's start simple. How do you explain Cursor to your grandmother?
I actually remember explaining the idea for Cursor to my family, my grandparents, who live in rural Vermont. It's like a town with 500 people. And it was when we had just kind of set out to do what became Cursor, and got a lot of sideways glances from them, and also the people that were at like the rural Vermont lawn party. But the way I describe it to them is Cursor is the best way to build software with AI for professional developers. And so, we are in the coding space kind of like what Google Docs is in the writing space, or Notion is in the writing space, or Figma is in the design space. And that is, we're like the pane of glass that the knowledge worker lives in to do work in coding. And we use AI to help them do that faster.
So what was the original spark that led to this idea?
So I started the company with 3 close friends from MIT who'd worked with a lot in the past. And all 4 of us have been programming for a very long time, ever since we were really young. Some of us came to programming, building games. Some of us came to programming, building robots. A couple of us came to programming actually working on AI from the very start. And so, our background is doing things like developing recommendation systems at big tech companies, working on academic uses of AI, like improving the speed at which robots can learn from yes/no reward data, improving computer vision algorithms. One of my co-founders also built a startup that was going up against Google using LLM technology in sort of 2020, 2021. But come from an AI background, and circa 2021, there were kind of 2 moments that got us really excited. One was using the early beta of GitHub Copilot, actually, which for us was the first really useful AI tool that we had ever used. And moreover, it was the first useful AI tool we had used. It was also the most useful dev tool we had used in maybe a decade. And that really viscerally made it clear that AI was this crazy new set of colors to paint with, that we're going to make a lot more possible in the future. The other moment that excited us was following the research coming out of places like OpenAI that showed that if you scaled up data and you scaled up model size, it looked like we were getting predictable returns. And it looked like there were a few orders of magnitude to go on that trend. And so those 2 things got us excited about the capabilities of these models and the ability to build products with these models. And the idea of building a company that picks an area of knowledge work and then tries to invent what that area of knowledge work will look like as this tech gets more mature really animated us. And that's both because, the interfaces that you'll need to do knowledge work as AI matures will change. But also, if you build the product where the knowledge work happens, you can then get a business at scale, and then you can use that to push on the underlying technology and actually then improve the models underneath. Kind of get this flywheel going that can get you to a place where you augment more and more of the knowledge work, automate the parts that we don't want to stay around. And so that's where it came from. And we actually had a false start to begin with, where we had sort of a year wandering in the desert, working on a couple of ideas in that vein. And the main one was we picked an industry that we thought was kind of boring and sleepy, which was mechanical engineering. We were inspired by GitHub Copilot. We were inspired by coding tools. We thought that's really competitive. There are dozens of people doing that. Microsoft's doing that. Can't touch that. And so instead, what we did is we picked mechanical engineering. And yeah, we were basically working on models to help automate parts of mech-E. And in particular, we were training 3D autocomplete models to kind of predict the part that you were modeling in a CAD system ahead of time. And, spend a bunch of time on 3D ML. You can model the problem both as a 3D problem. You can also model it as a text completion problem, where you can take the actions that you're making in a CAD system, you can kind of turn them into code written in text, like a bunch of method calls. And then you can train models to be really good at completing that text. And then the user doesn't see that. The user just sees the 3D autocomplete. But spent a bit of time doing that. It had really bad founder market fit. Like, we are not mech-Es. There was a big blind man and the elephant problem. And so eventually, decided to put that aside and decided to build for what we were really passionate about, which was programming.
Was this the moment of the pivot that you realized that this was just the wrong area to be in?
Yeah, it was, in particular, we had run out of data in the CAD space. And the set of things that you could build, it kind of gets into the technical details, but 3D ML is pretty underdeveloped. You don't get a lot of transfer from existing pre-trained models in that space. So, GPN isn't, back then wasn't that good. Even now it isn't that good at that domain. Other open source models weren't that good at that domain. So you don't get a lot for free. It all has to come from the specialty training you're doing in that space. And, eventually you kind of run out of CAD data on the internet because there's many orders of magnitude less CAD data than there is code data. And so it was a combination of that. And then, us just also, after many months, not being super passionate about the space.
Let's talk about forking VS Code. Felt like sort of a bold move. Seems like devs are notoriously loyal to their editors. Do you think that you were really trying to break a norm? Did it happen by accident? How did that decision work?
So when we started working on what became Cursor, the idea was to basically came from the idea that all the programming would flow through these models in the future. The active software development would change a lot. It would be possible to build a method of building software that isn't this weird, esoteric, labor-intense thing where to do things that are kind of simple to describe on a computer, you need to edit millions of lines of these logic files and spend a bunch of time with dozens of people doing that. Instead, we thought, the active software building should really just be about specifying how you want the software to work and how you want it to look. And I still think we're really far away from that end goal. But from that, it was clear that we were going to need to edit what the active software building looks like. We were going to need to edit the UI. And so it wasn't actually that contentious from the start that we were going to do our own editor instead of an extension or something like that. What was contentious was what base to build that off of. And so we actually started not by, basing the editor off of VS Code, which is what we do now. It's what a lot of browsers do when they base things off of Chromium. We built everything from scratch to begin with. And so, yeah, we built basically our own minimally, useful version of VS Code. And then with our first AI features, and so had our own pane system, had our own integrated terminal, had our own remote SSH, had our own LSP integrations, had our own Copilot integration at the time because we didn't have anything to do with autocomplete back then. And the list went on and on and on. And we released that, and I think we realized that the roadmap on that was going to be very long. A lot of our time, a lot of our engineering calories were going to be spent reinventing the wheel. And then that's why we decided to base things off of VS Code.
Let's talk about AI. So the buzzword, but there are challenges that go into building something that's truly AI native. Vibe coding is a new buzzword. You've talked about the risks of it, and where AI writes most of the code, developers lose the thread. How do you think we have to strike the balance between speed and control?
So we don't think of ourselves as a vibe coding platform. Even though I think in the original tweet, that was, we were the ones mentioned. We aspire to let professional devs be able to step up a level of abstraction and deal less with like the boilerplate formal programming languages and, increasingly, just kind of specify the logic they want to exist at a higher level. And I think that one way to view LLMs is like there are these helpers that you can delegate work to. I think another way to view LLMs is it's kind of like an advanced interpreter or compiler technology, where to tell a computer what you want it to do before you really had to spell it out in, if statements and for loops and, variables and be very, very specific. But now, the LLM can kind of fill in the gaps. It has a lot of context about what you're trying to do. There's a lot of context about your organization. There's a lot of context about the existing piece of software, and you can be more concise. So we want to get to a place where for professional development, you can just like eventually not look at the code as much, but we're not there yet. um, and so there's the how much do you have to pay attention to the code? And right now for professional development, you really do. For prototyping things, I think it's really cool to see a proliferation of tools where entirely you can kind of just skip that step. But when you're working on, a code base with dozens of other people, hundreds of other people, thousands of other people, you still have to look at the code right now. But yeah, I think that even in the end state where you can step up the level of abstraction, it's really important to us that you can. That's an important part of keeping that in mind is an important part of our product development process.
Yeah. So maybe English is not the new programming language yet, but maybe it could be in the future. What do you think that is going to mean for how we develop and build software?
Yeah, I think that there's this interesting chasm we need to cross as a tool where if we make kind of some of the things that exist within Cursor really good, like predicting the next set of things you're going to do within a code base, or our agent, where you're asking, high level about the code base or asking for a change to be made. If those things get to be really good, then there's going to be this question of, if you're using that to write 50% of your code, can you just, close your eyes and not really look at the code as much? And I think that there will be a hard set of problems to solve to get there. I think one of them is potentially you may need to evolve what a programming language looks like. And I think that, having a written down representation of the logic of your software that you can point at and look at and understand, I think is pretty important. It's a pretty important function of code. And I don't think that goes away. And I think that could get higher level. And so for us, we think it looks less like English. And I think a little bit more like the evolution of a formal programming language to be higher level. And so think, syntax highlighting still exists. Things like methods still exist where like you're naming a piece of logic and you can use it in a bunch of different places. But yeah, then maybe it looks a little bit more like English kind of within these methods.
Let's talk a little bit about growth. So Cursor's rise has been anything but slow. What drove the acceleration? You went from sort of zero to massive adoption in about a year.
Yeah, so it didn't feel fast at first. So as mentioned, there was this kind of first year in the wilderness where we were working on, for a long time, ideas that didn't end up being Cursor. For maybe 6 months, we were working on mechanical engineering, working on 3D ML models there. And then after that, we were kind of working on the precursor to Cursor. And then, after we launched Cursor, there was kind of a year of dialing in the product before it really started to take off. And, the product was growing, but the numbers were small. And then it was after really getting the product into a good state, working on both the end application side of things, and then also an important part of our product, an important product lever for us has actually been working on custom models that work under the hood with the biggest foundation models. And together they've made Cursor much better. But it was only after dialing in the product after a year that things started to take off. And then, yes, things have been very fast.
Was there something that you got wrong early on that shaped how you are now?
I mean, yeah, we definitely made a lot of mistakes. There are, I think the biggest ones would be in the specifics of, as with any kind of experimental product development process, if you knew the answer at the end, you could save yourself a lot of time by shortcutting, what you end up building and how you build it. Because there's a lot that you learn in the act of building. And so that's kind of one category. The other one on the company building side of things is just, I think we could have, knowing the growth we ended up having, built the company a little bit earlier. And so started hiring earlier.
Was there someone like a key role that you hired that made a real difference?
So we kind of obsessed over the first 10 people that we hired. And it was not a super, I feel kind of bad for our first employees. Like it was a little intimidating where okay, so there are 4 of us and we all really like what we do. So we work a lot. And the first person who joined was the first employee for 2 or 3 months because we spaced out our hiring. It was hiring one person every 2 months or something like that. And so they had the unfortunate luck of just being stuck with us all the time and we're mostly just kind of like talking about work at every single meal, and it was a little bit wall to wall. And now, things are a bit different. But we obsessed over the first 10 people we hired. We hired very slowly, and I think all of them were crucial to our success. And it is this amazing group that's very cross-functional, where we need to be, as a company, excellent at building a product that millions of people use every day, for 8+ hours a day, right? We're the place where they live on a computer. And so there's a level of polish that we need to aspire to, and I think even improve on there. And then at the same time, we know that Cursor in 2 years is going to look very different from Cursor today. Cursor today looks different from Cursor a year ago. And so there's a ton of experimentation that needs to be done. And so we need to be excellent at the product side of things. We need to be excellent at the model side of things too. And we need to also be excellent at infrastructure, both for ML and scaling things. And the first 10 people spiked in each of those domains. And also spiked, across the board in seniority. We had a few people who dropped out of school for this, and are excellent. And then we have, folks who were the 15th engineer at GitHub, and the VP of infrastructure there. And so kind of across the board, a diverse group, both functionally and also in seniority.
You've said one of your biggest mistakes was hiring too slowly. What held you back, and then what eventually changed your mind?
I think that this was actually in many ways an asset, but we had this overriding fear of focusing on anything other than making the product better. And I remember early on, we had this intern who, it was during that first year of dialing in the product. And, we were growing, and this intern was like, guys, the product's good enough. When are we going to stop working on the product? We should just grow it. But yeah, no, I mean, we were really worried about working on anything other than the product. We were all for coding on the product every day. And we shunned, I don't know, doing speaking events or networking or hiring at the start. And I think that was to the detriment of things where, it takes time to find really great people. And so we just didn't focus on it enough to begin with.
Speaking of this behind the curtain, how you operate, what about your internal tools? How do you think about adopting something or ditching something, in addition to using Cursor, obviously?
I mean, we want to use the best-in-class tools. I think we're in this moment where the ROI of great tools is so incredibly high. They're so cheap for the effect they give. And so we're very down to experiment. And yeah, at the same time, we're big users of tools that many of you guys have heard of, like Notion and Slack, and kind of run the company off of them.
Yeah. Speaking of tools and Notion, I think we might be a little bit curious how founders like yourself use Notion. What role does it play in Cursor today, either personally or for you in the company?
It's been really helpful for scaling the company quickly. So now we're roughly 100 people within the company, and so it's been kind of a fast ramp. And it serves as our internal company wiki. And so our onboarding docs are there. Our schedules for products and engineering are there. Our schedules for marketing are there. And so it's an artifact that anyone at the company can look at, and has helped a ton with giving people kind of the overall context of the company, which has been really important for scaling.
Being a new joiner at Notion, I'm doing my onboarding through Notion, which is a very meta experience. So looking ahead, do you see Notion's role evolving at Cursor as the company scales? Any exciting new features you're excited to explore?
Yes. So as we get bigger, I think just the amount of stuff that will be in Notion will be much more. It will multiply by a ton. And so very excited to use the AI Q&A more as we get bigger. But yeah, as we grow more, as we get more stuff in Notion, I think the AI Q&A will be really helpful for getting context on the company.
We're right in the middle of Focus Week at Notion, where we cancel all of our meetings and work on projects. And it's actually hard to do that, but it's amazing. It's amazing once you can actually make it happen. How do you think about that kind of focus for your team now? Hyper fast environment, lots of AI, lots of development, things change all the time. What's the secret sauce for keeping the team really focused?
Yeah. So I think a lot of this comes from both the hiring process and also the founding team, where we've been inoculated to an environment for the past, 3.5 years of crazy announcements left and right every few weeks, and lots of, competitive pressures of, things launching or unlaunching, and the underlying tech changing. And so I think early on, we were sort of in the mode of pay attention to everything, it all matters so much. And then also not to mention just like the inundation of customer feedback. It's just like there's a lot of noise. And I think that first year of dialing in the product kind of inoculated us to only so many things matter. And we'd, try to really focus on the things that matter. And those don't come up that often. I don't think you really have to be that reactive. And so in the hiring process, we've really tried to look for people who are pretty understated and who kind of fit the mold of Stripe has this great term of like micro pessimism and macro optimism. But like there are people who think we can shoot for this ambitious goal of automating programming, replacing it with a much better way of building software. But then on the micro level, they're never happy with the state of where we are. This, sort of these pixels are off, or, this thing is late and can be done faster. So look for people like that and, try to explicitly screen out people who might tend a little bit more towards the hypey side, I think.
Yeah. Always happy, never satisfied. Okay, so we've reached our advice block. We always end on these two questions. If you could leave one building block of advice behind for other founders, what would it be?
It is so hard because the advice is really contextual. I would say, we early on were very familiar with like all of the, or for lots of different companies, how they got started, like the windy starting paths. And in Silicon Valley, there's lots of startup orthodoxy at this point. And if you dig into the details of how, companies that we really look up to were started, many of them, there's always a counterexample for everything. And so I think that like the meta advice is like, be really skeptical of taking advice and kind of just think through the details of what you're doing. And I think that, one place where we broke things, which could apply across, or could be applicable to people building today, is we started as a solution in search of a problem, which is not really something you're supposed to do when you're starting a company, where we were really excited by AI and all the, opportunities it afforded. And then, from that, we got to a place of, we want to build the best way to code with AI. We want to eventually automate programming and replace it with something much better. And that's a very like non-lean startup idea. I actually think Notion embodies this really well too. It started with Ivan and Simon and others, being really interested in democratizing software building too. And very different, sort of maybe similar-ish end goal, but like very different means. And for you guys, it's, through this weird, wacky idea of having, reusable primitives. And it took a long time for that to work. And it was kind of a solution in search for a problem too. And I think that in AI, given that so much new stuff is possible right now, it may actually be possible to kind of, pick less of a niche problem, pick more of an expansive vision, and build from there. If you just have the faith to kind of continue going for a while.
Yeah. So let's say you had to completely build from scratch. What's the first block that you would build looking back, especially in the age of AI?
I think it starts with the co-founding team, and I think I'm lucky to have 3 excellent co-founders. And, another piece of orthodoxy you hear is, big co-founding teams don't really work. They're really complicated. They're really messy. And I think it has been a massive asset to us. I think all 3 of my co-founders are excellent. We all serve, even though on the surface, at a resume level, we look very similar, we all have very different interests within the company and serve different roles. And we were able to get very far with just the 4 of us. So
that's great. Michael, thanks for giving us such an honest and energizing look into AnySphere and Cursor. You guys are a case study in speed and focus and growth, and we're really happy to have you here today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much.